So Andy Burnham has promised growth in every postcode. It's a big, attractive political line, the sort of thing that voters think, that sounds great.
Good growth in every British postcode. What a sea change that would be in the way UK government thinks about our own country.
It does also tell us quite a lot about Burnham's own politics, I think. He's long argued that Britain is too London-centric, that Whitehall is too slow, you evildoers in Whitehall, and that too many decisions about towns and cities are made by people who don't live in them.
It's not necessarily causal that if the decisions were made somewhere else, the growth would come though, Cleo, which is partly what we're going to get into today.
We certainly are. What we're going to be asking is, Andy Burnham, he's promised growth in every postcode, as we now know, but what does that look like, and can it actually be done? Hello, and welcome back to In the Room. Before we get into it, we'd love it if you followed us on Instagram, where you can see all the best bits of the show. We are at intheroom.pod.
You can also watch us on YouTube. Our channel is In the Room Politics. And if you want to send us an email, and again, we are absolutely loving our correspondence, so thank you. You can send us an email at intheroom@independent.co.uk.
Right.
This is how Cleo feels talking about the economy, just a big old sigh.
I do. I'm looking at a lot of scary numbers here. Well, I think they're scary. And at a certain point, these numbers for a lot of people don't mean anything. But there is one that is genuinely very scary. That is, public debt is 95% of GDP. So our debt is kind of everything that we make.
Yes.
We're servicing our debt all the time. And from a personal point of view, that really resonates.
So it is true to say, of the many problems/opportunities that Andy Burnham has, the economy in our country is resolutely not in a good state. So he's not quite walking into a burning building, but he's walking into a house where there's quite a large mortgage. The bills are really high. Repairs are overdue. Absolutely everybody wants more money for everything. It's all on credit. And also, I'd like a new kitchen, please, effectively.
Yeah. Are we in a situation where, like, our sofa can get repossessed, or?
Well, I don't know if anyone's really. I don't think we're quite that bad.
Yeah.
But there's no kind of untapped fortune here, and unfortunately for Andy Burnham, some of the problems in our economy go back a really long way. So there's no easy fix, and one of his issues is that he's not got very long before the next election. And he's got to try and find ways of actually physically growing the economy that work in the next 2 years, as well as fit with all of his narrative about what he wants to do in terms of changing the country. And those two things, there's some tension and choice between them too. So, you want to devolve all of the powers, but then you also want to be able to pull the levers and make the growth happen now. And those two things aren't compatible.
And actually, you want people to feel like there's growth now. That's the really difficult thing. It's not just whether you can trot out some figures, because as I just said, that often doesn't mean anything to people. The problem is, can you make Britons, the average Briton, feel better off? Because one of the slightly worrying things is that as a European bloc, we aren't doing that badly. We're just on a very sluggish continent, and amazingly to me anyway, we're doing better than Germany, which is the country that Andy Burnham holds up as the kind of perfect devolved federalist state for getting growth in every postcode. So that's a bit worry that his blueprint for growth is objectively failing.
Yeah, and I think that it's fair to say that as much as we all like to think we're in control, not to keep on going back to some of our old Brexit friends, that actually the UK economy is particularly susceptible to what's happening in the world. So the reason that we have reeled more from the shocks from the Ukraine invasion, from the shock from COVID, from all of these things, is because we're so intrinsically tied to what is happening elsewhere. But there's a very good article in The Economist last week by my old boss, Mark Sedwell. I know.
Shout out to Sedders.
Shout out to Mark Sedwell, which amongst other things that he's talking about is the kind of shape of our economy. So I'm going to shamelessly crib from that. So if it's wrong, it's not my fault, it's his. Just FYI, which I think is what I said quite a lot when we worked together. But basically, he said that 3/4 of our demand is consumption, effectively.
So it's just me buying stuff.
That's you and me buying Jellycats, I think, basically. That's the Jellycat economy. That's 3/4 of consumption. And then 3/4 of our economy is supply. So we do 3/4 of our spending is on buying stuff. And 3/4 of the supply side of it, that's the demand, is the buying stuff. The supply side of it is providing services. So we don't make the stuff that we buy. We import it from overseas, and we import large amounts of our food. We import large amounts of things that you'd sort of think, well, surely we make that here. We really don't. We are a global trading nation, and we export services and we import goods, and then we buy a lot of goods. I'm looking at you. So if you look back at times when our economy has been really productive and we're growing, it's not just the amount of GDP, which matters. So we'd all be richer if our economy was producing more money and more wealth. But also we are collectively a bit poorer because we're taking so much of our economy is being spent on tax, and so much of our tax is going to things which are, an economist would say, like unproductive. So the vast majority of our tax goes on welfare and pensions. And of course, it's important to look after people. I'm not sitting here advocating for like, well, let's not bother with that. But the way in which we've got ourselves structurally to a position where an awful lot of the public subsidy is effectively going into things that don't produce economic growth.
Right.
So it's a declining situation.
Right. So just so I can really nail this in layman's terms, what you're saying is, because we have no growth in the economy, or
Very
enough
little.
really,
Yeah.
we are raising that money through tax. So we're at the highest tax threshold ever, and yet we are still so much in debt because we're having to raise so much through debt too.
And even then, people will say they don't think we're spending enough on various bits of our system, including health and everything else. So we are going to, having presented this, slightly gloomy position, we're going to come back to actually what do we think this means for Andy in political terms. We're already calling him Andy and our kid. And then what we think might happen and what might need to happen. Just as a really good ready reckoner for you to have in your head about the tax side of this, which I think matters too, is that for every £1 the government spends, 28p goes to welfare and pensions, 20p goes to health, 11p goes to education, 8p goes to interest on the national debt. So that's our credit card. That's not paying down the debt, that's paying the interest.
Just keeping our head above water.
And the rest is then spread across defence, policing, transport, local government, everything else. So a vast proportion of our public spending is going to things which businesses would tell you, although they're absolutely important and essential, that a lot of it is towards the less productive side of the economy.
So for those of us who feel completely tapped out by the end of the month, that's where the nation's economy is too, basically. We're all in it together.
I think so.
We're taking on water.
Good news. Good news. We're all in it together. And we are literally all in it together, because some of the problems, take housing for an example, that we are paying because we haven't been building enough housing for years. Everything is more expensive. So your housing cost is more expensive. My housing cost is more expensive. It's more expensive for the government to build. They need to build more council housing for people to get social rents because nobody can afford private housing because there isn't enough housing. So quick fix, let's sort out housing, please. Thanks very much.
Ah, yes. Well, we'll get on to that because there are a few little quick fixes that could help Andy Burnham with his growth in every postcode dream. So there's a big difference between what Prime Ministers say on the way into being Prime Minister and then what they're faced with in terms of their choices when you're with them. And I think on this growth in every postcode, this is a total classic, because there is a huge difference between, are you going to totally make the right long-term decisions, restructure the economy, take the pain in the short term, but then for long-term dividends, or are you going to end up just having to do what's politically expedient in exactly the same way that every inhabitant of Number 10 has done in the last period, with perhaps the notable exception of Liz Truss. And like we've lived through some of that precise dynamic, the clash between this is the long-term right thing to do and then this is the short-term pragmatic answer. I mean, that was Johnson 2020, right? Yes. So, yeah, I do really feel like we've been here before, but in slightly different circumstances. So pre-COVID, but post-2019 general election, we all kind of gathered after the Christmas break, January 2020, and, there were very specific instructions for the civil service, which was we are going to have 10 years of like real change here. And factored into that was obviously a political plan, which was we will have a general election in 5 years. To be clear, this is pre-COVID. So we need to have enough evidence of growth and change that people will stick with us and that they'll feel it and they'll see it so that we can see a proper plan through. And we want to have a major rethink of planning. We want to have immigration reform so that we can bring in the best and brightest, people with PhDs and science backgrounds, and some of the big growth areas like Oxford and Cambridge can feel the benefits of these brains coming in. We wanted to have a meaningful reshuffle, which is the only one I really remember being part of, where we felt we actually had some round pegs in round holes. We wanted to move the House of Lords to York. We wanted, science is a really important part of our thinking here. Green jobs, planning reform, which is a huge one on both infrastructure but actually on housing, using brownfield sites around stations, that kind of thing. That was a very kind of long-term plan with some short-term thoughts and feelings to keep everyone tied in. However, there were two sort of totemic issues that I think became indicative of problems ahead with that particular Prime Minister, and those were HS2 and Huawei.
Yeah,
not
so
Hawaii, as you like to call it.
I do like to misspell Huawei as Hawaii, because even after all this time, I literally can't spell it. You're right. That period of time was this massive clash between this long-term aspirational, this is what we're going to do, we're going to do all these really big things, and then the short-term pragmatism of we're going to do this expedient stuff. And we should come back to planning, because planning is going to be the nightmare, I think.
It's your bag, baby.
It is my bag. I was at a party last week talking about the 1947 planning reforms. That's how I like to roll at a party. So
scintillating chit-chat.
Please invite me more. But we should come back to that, because that's like a devolution headache. But my memory of that time as well on these two decisions, so that was, do we scrap HS2 or do we carry on with HS2, which is a decision that I think every Prime Minister, it's extraordinary that we keep on going round and about this thing. And were Huawei allowed to invest in some telecoms infrastructure? So you're absolutely right, and I'm sure you're going to give us the nitty-gritty on why these decisions went one way or the other. I do also remember it as a total point of breaking confidence between Dom Cummings and the Prime Minister, because Dom was very strong on, we need to do the right long-term things. Some of it's going to be hard, but it's going to be the right thing for the economy and the broader plan that we need.
But you must do it now.
Do it now when you've got this, you kind of use the capital of this massive amount of goodwill to do the hard but right thing. And then what happened in practice on both of these decisions, it was not the hard and right choice that was made.
Yeah, and Johnson wanted to continue to ride the popularity wave. And then obviously COVID came along, and the rest is history, as we know. So just very quickly on HS2, I mean, this has hung around our necks like an albatross for years as a nation. And to put this in a bit of kind of cost perspective, we have now spent more on HS2, a train line we currently don't even use yet, than NASA spent on the recent trip around the moon. So that's quite sobering, isn't it?
Well, I think it's embarrassing, actually.
Yeah. And you're quite right. Cummings tried to kill it. Johnson loves big infrastructure projects. I suppose it was also a Conservative legacy, because it's actually from the Cameron and Osborne years. And we've had issues with newts and bats and all sorts. I mean, I joke about it, but it's actually so aggravating to even think of this.
There's something in that, though, which is why have we got here as an economy, and why have we got here in terms of decisions that government make? So one of the things that I think is little understood is that the reason you end up with this unbelievably large regulatory burden, and everyone talks about the way, if we want to go back to having an economy that is firing on all cylinders, governments don't grow the economy. The thing that grows the economy is businesses being able to make money, employ people, everyone gets richer, hurrah. Like, it's very hard for governments to do that. You do need people to spend their own money and attract investment and all of those things. And everybody says about our country, there's too much of a regulatory burden. I sometimes hear that and think, well, actually regulation is quite useful, because that's why people don't die. So thanks very much to your anti-regulatory bonfire of red tape. Like, not all regulation is bad. However, what we've had in over time in Whitehall, because of the way that decisions are made, is that if you're the department that cares about newts and bats and badgers, then there's no downside to you for just constantly putting in more and more and more protections for whatever you want to care about, because you are so strongly incentivised to kind of do your job, which is my job is protecting nature. And then you have another bit of the Whitehall that's like, well, my job is protecting education and my job is protecting this. And it's like, whose job is making sure that the country functions and that it's possible to do business in a place? And that's one of the criticisms that really sticks for Andy Burnham's Whitehall is a bad place to make decisions, is because all of these separate organisations with very separate incentives who never have to make hard choices between, is this a good idea? Would this affect house building? One of the reasons why this is the most expensive country in the world to build houses is because of the unbelievable slew of regulations that have been imposed on house builders with really good intent, right? They're all environmental protections, or they're, about trying to make sure that people can walk to transport modules or whatever. People don't start off with thinking, how can I make sure that this country doesn't grow? I can't wait. I mean, maybe they do. Maybe this is an absolutely giant conspiracy. I'm so much more on the cock-up and not incentives-aligned end of the spectrum. That's why we're here. And it's pretty easy sitting in Whitehall to just say, oh, yeah, OK, that seems a bit annoying, but, newts matter.
But this is why his intent is so important. If growth in every postcode is what matters to him the most, then those other things should fall to one side, and he will have to arbitrate on these things, and he will have to say, but I've said my priority is growth, and if that means house building or infrastructure or whatever, that is more important to me than bats. I'm just going to say it. It's crazy, but I'm going to say it. The second sort of totemic issue, of course, was Huawei. And as you say, this is a Chinese company that wanted to essentially entwine itself into our would you say broadband infrastructure?
You would say broadband.
Broadband. God, so nice.
What is the width?
The World Wide Web.
What is the width of the band?
In the fibre topic.
It's like the Telegram, but jazzier.
Yes. Well, and as you can imagine, there were major security implications to this. This is also not British technology either. It really speaks to the other problem with our economy, which is importing technology and expertise from elsewhere and not having homegrown science and technology doing it for ourselves. And like, why would you think how preciously we guard the undersea cables that are bringing information in and out of the UK? Why would we invite a foreign state straight into the heart of it all? And there was as you can imagine, there was a huge row about this. Should we be buying our own satellites instead and doing this ourselves? And it was just it was a really difficult time for thinking, oh my gosh, Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings in January 2020, even then, they're going to part company.
This is my favourite thing to say, but actually Dom was entirely right.
But this is really 2 months before we had to start locking down in the UK, and these arguments were happening, therefore, in a vacuum. So, there was obviously a parallel universe where these decisions may or may not have been taken. The point is that Johnson already at that stage was not inclined to go with the Cummings approach. But can you imagine the situation that Andy Burnham will be inheriting now, even without what COVID has done to our economy, if we'd been able to put those plans in place at the time?
I know, but I can't quite cope with the multiverse of possibilities of all the different political things that might have happened if should have, would have, could have.
Everything everywhere all at once.
That's certainly what it felt like. Let's just go back to Andy Burnham and the choices ahead of him and this growth in every postcode thing. And maybe we should just pick a couple of other issues. I do want to talk about planning. Planning is a really good example of how everybody thinks. Everybody. You find anybody who thinks that you should keep planning the planning system as it is. It's like, it doesn't matter what political party you are. Planning needs to be freed up. We want to build both infrastructure for the economy and also houses for people to live in, which would be a tremendously good idea. Then we have to free up the planning system. What that actually means in practice is at national level, you are going to say, very well done, people in a local place who might not like this thing to happen. Tough luck. It's going to have to happen. So what you are, it's sort of the anti-devolution is planning, because you might in theory say, well, what we want is for every place to make their own decisions about what happens in their place. Which town is going to say, what I'd really love is a small reactor nuclear plant just outside our town, thanks very much.
Yeah, and an immigration detention centre while we're at it, and 2,000 new homes
and
on
a
this
massive
nice
new
field.
train line over this field. And that's not how if local decision-making worked like that, we wouldn't be where we are today. So you are both saying, with the one hand, what I want to do is devolve decision-making to these places and hope that the communities in these places will be so public-minded that they will want to sacrifice something themselves and give up something that belongs to them, whatever it is, and in order that some unknown other people benefit from all of this infrastructure, all of this housing, and all of this disruption. So it's a diametrically opposed set of decisions, that. And I think that's going to be pretty hard to unravel. And you won't get growth without doing something on planning. She says very confidently, but I'm very confident about
Just
that.
on the domestic front with planning, having lived in some rural villages and stuff like that, in my experience, people are not anti the houses coming, but they want it to come with another school or a doctor's surgery. It's the stretch on the other resources rather than the number of people coming in that seems to stress people out the most.
Yeah, and also, is it houses where they can afford to buy, or that their children can afford to live in? Because too often what you have is, especially in affluent areas, is what we get replicated is all the big houses, and no one's incentivized to build the smaller houses, which is actually the thing that people could afford. So housing is uniquely unaffordable in this country, and it's one of those things which we have a really big problem with and needs to be fixed. And Andy Burnham has said a lot, quite rightly, I should say, as chair of Shelter, about building social housing. We definitely need a massive increase in the number of social homes to be built. We proportionally in this country have more social housing than most other economies. And that's because we need to have kind of under market rent, because market rent is so expensive.
Yeah, it is.
So we just need more. We need more of everything when it comes to housing.
Oh, well, that's step one then. More of everything.
More of everything.
But it's not just cutting planning, is it? There's other red tape that Andy could perhaps free up, or at least, I would argue, undo some of what Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer have done on the economy. I'm thinking of business.
Business. It's undoubtedly true, to go back to this really boring thing, that you have to reduce the cost of doing business if you want to get investment in, if you want businesses to grow. Now, I think the smartest way of doing that is to pick some sectors, pick some places, like back winners. So actually, we think the future of the British economy is in AI and tech. It's in life sciences. It's in high-end manufacturing of artisan products. It's whatever it is. You need to pick some things, and you need to pick some geographies and say you're going to subsidise those businesses. And you either can carry on paying people to not work because there isn't work for them, or you can start subsidising the work. I find the whole kind of framing of the Labour debate a bit odd about this, because they talk a lot about the cost of living and they don't talk very much about the reason cost of living is a problem isn't because things are expensive, it's because people aren't paid enough. And actually it should be about how can you get more higher wages that then you could afford to buy even more Jellycats.
But this is one of Andy Burnham's problems, I think, is that it's the political reality of the parliamentary party he has as well. And a lot of the cabinet, a lot of his MPs have not run a business before. They've come from the charity sector, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But you end up having people who are not necessarily that well versed on the economy. There are group sessions in Parliament at the moment for MPs to learn about what the bond market is and what the base rates of tax are and stuff like that. And you know, it's not a great starting position for him to have MPs who will be basing a lot of their reaction to his plans on how his constituents feel about it, and therefore how he packages them up. So a good example of this is the winter fuel duty and the welfare debate, which obviously did not go very well for Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. The government ended up backtracking on both of those, and the idea was that the wealthiest pensioners would lose the winter fuel allowance, which I think is totally fair enough, but that wasn't how it was presented. Instead, most of the public came away thinking winter fuel was being taken away from the poorest, and same goes for welfare, where people thought that disabled people were going to be without their payments. And again, that just wasn't explained very well. But the reaction from Labour MPs was incredibly strong, and there were rebellions on these. And Andy Burnham has got a job on his hands to, I don't want to sound sort of too snooty about this, but to sort of educate some of his MPs with the hard choices ahead, and to say, this is difficult, what I'm proposing, but it will work and you have to stick with me, which I think is really what Keir Starmer was saying. He just wasn't saying it with a nice accent.
No, and actually, we've made ourselves in a poorer position because one of the other reasons that we're paying these levels of debt interest, so it has directly cost us all money that we've had so much political instability. Because when investors, and you talked about the bond markets, but this stuff is always much more simple and more human than people dress it up as, that basically it is really, really not a good place to invest if you think the government's going to change every half an hour, the political direction is going to change really regularly, and someone's going to stand up and say we're definitely going to invest in this market, and then 6 months later there's another guy saying we're definitely not going to do that again, and you can't even rely on the same political party following the same principles. I mean, look at the kind of amazing rainbow of policy choices there were in the Conservative administrations from 2016 to 2024. I mean, pretty much covered the entirety of the political economy in those choices. So the more that he can project political stability, the more that he can genuinely build alliances and create cross-party consensus, particularly in places, the better. I think the other thing, if you think about what are the other things that Andy Burnham could actually do we align closer to the EU? So in terms of exports, obviously, for a very, very long time, our economy has been tailored towards exporting to the EU. That is much more complicated because of Brexit. There are very, very strong voices in the Labour Party that are saying what we need to do is align as close as possible to the EU now, because we want to, in the short term, just build that economy back again, and that will probably make a difference to some of the numbers. The problem with that choice is we'll be aligning ourselves with a bit of the world economy that is definitely not growing.
Correct.
So actually, the US is seismically important to our economy in terms of exports. It's seismically important in terms of digital. All the new bits of the economy aren't facing back into the EU. And there are some quite hard choices there about, do you, out of sentiment or kind of short-term pragmatism, think we'll just unwind some stuff and then we can maybe claw back to 70% of where we were 10 years ago on some services, some exports? Or do we say, actually, we need to double down, go further, align more with the parts of the world economy that are really growing and likely to carry on growing over the next 10 years? And that's a hard but very brutal choice.
But Andy Burnham's solution is devolution, growth in every postcode, number 10 in the north. Is this the silver bullet that's going to solve our problems, Helen?
I don't think devolution, therefore, equals growth. If you look at what has actually happened in places that have had a lot of devolution, so take Wales, for example, it's hard to argue that the practical impact of that has been that the Welsh economy has been better, or in fact services have been better. So the NHS is by every measure poorer in Wales than it is in England.
Yeah.
So you shouldn't draw a causality between you just devolve something so therefore it's going to be fine, because the practical reality is that isn't a given. And it's also not actually that legendary an argument for people, which is, well, don't worry, you haven't had any growth, but you have now got 84 new bureaucrats working in the town hall who are now taking another set of decisions that you didn't really understand or care about in the first place. Woohoo, we've given you that sort of growth.
The sitcom writes itself.
Even I wouldn't watch a sitcom set in local government.
Oh, God, that
brutal.
Oh, hurts my heart. But what are his options? Is there cause for optimism? What can he do?
So I think there is. I mean, I've said all that in a slightly snide way about devolution. It is also true that were you able to let places that really have the chance to go gangbusters on backing particular sectors for the economy, to really make their universities totally pop and much more commercial, to put investment around places. There are things that you can definitely do in geographies of the country if you want to, and they should definitely be doing that. And that has to involve a bit of local decision making, but it's not kind of one size fits all, just devolve some powers and therefore equals growth everywhere. I also think, and this is easy for me to say because it's so far away from being my day job anymore, so why not be as full, fat, annoying as I possibly can be. I think one of the things that's easy to see from the outside is the framing of all of these conversations are very old money. It's like we're basically effectively still having the same rows in Whitehall around the structure of the economy that somebody who'd worked in the civil service in the 80s or 90s or early 2000s would recognise. It's the same old stuff.
The triple lock. I always hear.
It's the same old stuff. And I think that if you were to really imagine what does a properly 21st century economy look like, it wouldn't be like this. But good news, it might be like some of the things that this country is really good at. We have always been early adopters of tech and both as consumers and as investors in business. you can imagine that it's possible if we did sort out our sovereignty of our infrastructure, our AI, if we were able to monetize some of our data in a better way collectively. This is going to sound slightly mad, but bear with me. So there's this extraordinary piece of research that was done about the NHS in Wales by an American university, which, taking the full complete data set of people who were given the shingles vaccine at age of 80, in a longitudinal way, have been able to demonstrate that the shingles vaccine actually helps prevent dementia. They don't know why, but the data set was so big because it was the whole of the relevant population in Wales, and you could do a very clear compare and contrast between people who'd had the vaccine because they were 80, people who didn't have the vaccine because they were 81, and you could demonstrate over time that this had happened. Now, it's perfectly possible. We are the largest population cohort in the world who are all part of the same health system. Should you want to, and it's our data, but the NHS is ours, so we collectively could own and utilise the data that belongs to us because it's public data and start to be a bit more sensible. I remember seeing this mind-blowing presentation a few years ago about how you could effectively fund the whole of the NHS outside taxation if we were able to just use the data of our population to, it's not just like so that pharmaceutical people can do their drugs trials.
Careful.
But there's also, which does help, it's quite useful for drugs to be tested and for people to check causality. But you could map and understand so much more about your population, and you could also monetize it. So I am like a big fan of taking a big leap forward without sounding a bit like a communist. I think that is. I think that might be Mao. Is it Mao? Anyway, let's not do that. But I think there are totally different framings you could apply to what is a 21st century economy. How do we double down on the things that this country remains entirely excellent at? Education is one of those things. Innovation is one of those things. Like, we've got loads and loads and loads of incredible AI businesses that are here, and not just AI businesses. In the world of AI, some of the things that we've historically been fantastic at, like craftsmanship and art and creativity and all of these other things, like, why not just back ourselves to be really good at the things we're good at?
But I think that these are perfect examples of what could stand in Andy Burnham's way, strangely. So your example of the NHS is such a good one, which is essentially, if we fully digitised it, and that, they're already, straight away we lose a load of people who are very anxious about their data and ID cards and all that kind of stuff. But it would make sense to have our records in one place, but to be able to use that information to not only fund it, so it's not coming out of our tax money, but also to actually improve care. There are so many bogeys in that for particularly Labour MPs, the Labour Party, in fact large swathes of the population who will think, this is the first step towards privatising our precious NHS, even though it would still remain free at the point of care, even though they would actually get seen quicker and seen better. There's just like there's like a first hurdle you would fall at, which is just people saying, pharmaceutical companies getting involved in how we run the NHS. I don't like that.
And the irony is what I'm suggesting is that we collectively own something that at the moment is being monetised by private industry. So it's not, and I think we've moved on from the data privacy conversations, actually. If you think about what all of us on a day-to-day basis merrily accept all, click, whatever, like we...
Yeah, but then you mention ID cards and people lose their minds.
Yeah, because that was really badly communicated.
All in the framing, Andy.
It's all in the framing.
I've had a couple of other thoughts for Andy, because it does seem to me that these are really, really good practical things he can do. And let's not forget, there are just quick things the government can do. If they can suddenly change legislation so that pubs can stay open till 4 a.m. or whatever it is for the World Cup, they can start do some serious thinking about cutting red tape and looking at what businesses need and how we can do this kind of stuff with our data without it turning into an appalling debate, because you can actually frame it properly. But I think he's got a couple of I don't know if it's problems exactly, but it's got a couple of things to think about. There is devolving geographically, and then there's exactly what we've described already, kind of devolving more atmospherically. What do businesses actually need? What is in the way? Do they have to backtrack on their tax for businesses and how they hire young people? question there. I think there will be, though, big problems with, again, his Labour MPs on particularly stuff like backtracking on the minimum wage, which they hold so dear now, even though, in a strange way, because we're not growing, the minimum wage ends up costing us more and fewer young people are being hired because they are now so expensive, relatively speaking, for a business that's already so burdened. And they will just need to think carefully in Andy Burnham's team about how they interact with the unions on this. Reformer are hot on their heels trying to get union support and union funding. And the unions will hold some of this, as you've put it, like old money thinking quite carefully.
I think there is a bit of just old thinking in general. So if you were to imagine that the primary purpose of the government is to make sure that the next generation have the greatest amount of opportunities, you'd make a whole set of different decisions really differently. That the burden, the tax burden, the lack of choice, all of these things are hitting our kind of the under 30s compared to the over 70s. We are wildly unequal. And a government that put its centre of gravity younger, I think, would really, really help. If you think about the mindset of what it really is like to be a young person in this country and sort of govern for them rather than their grandparents, that would make a massive difference.
Well, and the mistake they're making is they're bringing the voting age down to 16, but without particularly benefiting young people. So you're giving your next election away at this rate.
Well, and also like maybe look after those kids, possibly. The thing that if I had a magic wand, which I don't, I would like this next government to govern as if they're the government. So you made the point about they can change the law on what time the pubs are allowed to stay open for the football. I really hope they've internalised that they are the man now and they can change the law. And I don't want to hear a single government minister in this next period of time tell me that they can't do something, because they definitely can. They can choose not to, but there is nothing that a government of this majority can't do. Yeah. They can just make choices differently. So don't kind of give us this passive governing.
So where does this leave Andy Burnham? As you pointed out, Helen, there is this hopeful version. Britain does have enormous strengths in sciences, world-class universities. People do actually want to live here. We've got financial services, creative industries. I mean, people love our films and our actors and our arts. And we've got advanced manufacturing, AI, defence, lots of potential growth here if the right investment and the right thinking is there. And frankly, if the right red tape is removed. But what we're basically saying is that's not enough. He's got 2, maybe 3 years till the next general election. So he has to both make people feel like there's change and growth happening around them now so that they have the confidence to go with him again and see the mission through. That isn't easy, but there are immediate things that he can do. And I suppose our top advice to him today is there are some sunny uplands here potentially, but you have to make some really difficult choices and you have to decide what matters to you most and then just cut through that straight away, even if it makes you a bit unpopular with not only Labour MPs but the country at large for a while. And you should expect that, if anything.
Yes, and look, we like to be optimistic, but there is a harder version. Every Prime Minister promises growth. Every Prime Minister says they're going to reform Whitehall. Every Prime Minister believes they can move faster than the machine. Most discover very quickly that the machine moves pretty slowly, that money is much tighter than they think, and that political capital runs out. Let's hope for Andy that's a reckoning that takes quite a while.
Lucky he's got some new shorts to help him with that running.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Remember to follow us on your podcast player of choice and leave us a 5-star review.
And please do continue to email us your feedback and questions. We are in the room at independent.co.uk. If you're listening on Spotify, you can also comment under today's episode, and you can keep up with the best bits of the pod on Instagram. We are at intheroom.pod.
This podcast is part of the Independent Podcast Network and produced in association with Next Chapter Studios.
The executive producer is Rod Ardahali and the producer is Sam Durham.
A special mention to our content editor Maya Anushka, our video editor Vali Raza, and the videographer Dan Faber. It is week 25 and Cleo and I are still reading this from cards.
Thanks for listening. See you soon.